hazing as an eighth
No,
grader?
I mean, no. I mean, I think nothing. No, I would say no. Other than no, because
So
I think people were almost like, this kid's an eighth grader playing. I don't know if there was, and you have a junior or senior. Like, I'm almost embarrassed. Like, I don't. It was weird. But yeah, there was no hazing. I was accepted at one of the guys. Now, the interesting thing is, now we get to the freshman year, and of course, as an eighth grader playing and scoring a touchdown, again, got to keep emphasizing this. No internet back then, no cell phones, none of that. No. I mean, if your name was in the paper, if they wrote an article on you, that was a big deal. So I started getting attention, obviously, in the newspaper. So we get to the freshman year, and I'll spare you a lot of stuff, but we end up winning like 4 or 5 games our freshman year. So we really made, big strides. But now the issue was, I was starting at running back from the beginning of the season, starting on defense. Back then,
playing both ways.
Back then, you played both ways if you were a good player. So now you got upperclassmen that want to play those positions that aren't playing. So then you start getting parents involved. So we go through that freshman year, and then again, like I said, we won 4 or 5 games, and I got a lot of publicity newspaper wise, and I started getting colleges
as a freshman
sending me letters. The first school I ever got a letter from was Notre Dame, from Lou Holtz.
Really?
Yeah, and a lot of that was, I think like the Notre Dame Club of Rochester reached out to him, because I had the Democrat and Chronicle, Rochester Democrat and Chronicle, the newspaper, did an article on me, and in that article I said I was always a Notre Dame fan. So I think someone took that article and reached out, and so they loosely recruited me. But
how did that feel? I mean, come on, you get a letter from Lou Holtz. It's like,
no, it felt great. And so now I was just, and so now we get into the freshman year. Now I'm really into the workouts and the running. And I tell people all the time, and I'm going to say something here that's been said a million times, but it's so true and so meaningful. It's not what you do when people are watching you. It's what you do when you're alone and no one's watching you. And I was big on, working out. I would, back then, it was a Walkman, right? You put your music on.
Not even for a disc. It was a cassette tape.
And old school, I would go find a hill, like the old Walter Payton workouts, and just run hills and just do sprint work. And I do it all by myself. There was no program written down. There was no iPhone. I just went and ran, and I did things that I knew were good for football. So as we get into the sophomore year now we're getting a lot of publicity.
Right.
And we start out the first 4 games, I think we're 2-2. So again, much improved from a team that hadn't won a game in 3.5 years. But now this is where it gets interesting. So now I think some parents are getting aggravated that their children that are upperclassmen aren't playing. So I'll never forget it. So I'm a sophomore at Eastridge, and I had kind of struggled with grades a little bit. Okay. So there was some talk between myself and my parents about maybe going to a Catholic school just to kind of get that little strictness, if you will,
for the grades.
For the grade part of it. Because remember, back then, I know I've told you this before and you laughed. Back then, you needed a 700 on your SATs and a 2.0 grade average.
Right.
Grade point average to get a scholarship. I mean, so that's really what, if you were that player that could get a scholarship, that's what you were shooting for. Right, and people are going to listen to that and say, "Oh, that's like nothing." Well, that's what it was back then. So that was the goal. So anyway, sophomore year, I'll never forget. I get pulled out of class. It was a Monday. The athletic director, I won't even say his name, he pulled me out of class, and we're walking down the hall, and I'm kind of like oblivious to everything. I'm like, "Why is the AD pulling me out of class?"
That's not
and
normal.
He just gives me this spiel about, you gotta, it's so much better to spread the wealth and, share the football. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm thinking, I do what the coaches tell me.
Sure.
If the coach tells me to carry the ball 25 times, I carry the ball 25 times. If he gives it to me 3, I carry it 3. If he says you're gonna, punt the ball, that's the way I was raised.
Right.
With my parents, that you listen to the coach and you do the best you can. So I was like, yeah, whatever. So it had come to my attention that some parents had complained to the athletic department, like, this kid's been playing since his 8th grade. My kid's a junior now, and he hasn't played. And so when I went home and told my dad.
Well, hold on.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the athletic director is telling you got to spread the wealth, and you're sitting there going, how did it?
Well, I'm like, you're telling it to the wrong person. You need to tell the coach,
Right. So, I mean, and then how?
Well, and it caused issues because I found out he did talk to the coach, and no coach wants to be told, like, who to play, and I'm going to play.
You play to win. I
so
mean,
it was it was very uncomfortable.
Sure.
So when I went home and told my dad that, he was pissed.
Right.
That that I would get pulled out of class. So I'll never forget it.
Yeah, we don't want to.
So there was two. Well, there's more than 2 Catholic schools in Rochester, but there was 2 that I was kind of looking at when we kind of contemplated it. One was Aquinas Institute, and the other one's Bishop Kearney High School. And Bishop Kearney High School is literally 2 miles down the street from where Eastridge was. And I'll never forget, he was so mad. He told my mom. So they kept me out of school on Tuesday.
Right.
And he had made some calls, and he told my mom, go in there, ask for his transcripts,
right,
and leave. So that's what she did. And literally, my parents wrote a check for tuition. And on Wednesday, I was in Bishop Kearney High School, enrolled in Bishop Kearney High School, playing with that football team. Now, back then, you had to sit out 2 weeks.
Okay.
But now this was a whole other thing, too. So I go to Kearney, and they're a really good program. So that was part of it as well. I wanted to go to a school because at that point at Eastridge, I was kind of getting keyed on a lot, and it was just, it was a lot. So I wanted to go to a team that had a lot of good players on it. So the problem is when I go to Kearney, those coaches are like, they're talking me up. This kid's like great.
Right.
And so now they're like, oh, yeah, we'll see. So, I get there and people.
Not to like having a target on your back.
People think, Kearney gave him a scholarship and stole them away. Nope, they didn't recruit me. We called them.
Right.
I paid full tuition.
Right.
And I was there on Wednesday. And they did. I mean, they whooped my butt. But you know what? I shut my mouth. I played hard. And I earned their respect.
Now, would you say that, and I know when I was growing up, up in North Jersey, you had the Catholic high schools and you had the public high schools. And the Catholic high schools, the private schools usually excelled, in their football programs. Would you say there was a huge difference in caliber, like from the public school to the Catholic school?
Where I was, yes.
Okay.
But Eastridge was getting better, and they got better really quick over the next couple of years. So if I would have stayed there, if things would have been okay, we would have been competing for sectional titles. There's no doubt about it. Kearney was already in a really good spot. And so, and it was really interesting, too. Back then, the league that Kearney played in, so it was the City Catholic. So it was all the city schools.
Okay.
And all the Catholic schools. I mean, and so the city schools were just loaded with talent, as you can imagine.
Right.
And so it was just a knockout, tough conference to play in. And so, so that was eye-opening. Like, okay, there's a lot of really good athletes out here, but it makes you better. Yeah. And so that sophomore year, I got hurt a little bit, but I played. They went to the sectionals, which is the playoffs, and I played. But I got banged up a little bit, but it was really good. And like I said, the players really embraced me because I went there. I didn't have a chip on my shoulder. I didn't think I was someone great. I just wanted to be one of them.
Right.
And I played.
Right.
And I played special teams. And so, they accepted me. And then, of course, junior year, we went on and we won the Section 5 championship, Class A. We were really good. And so, on a side note, my best friend growing up, a guy by the name of Bert Richardson, who went on to play at the University of Iowa, and Bert has since passed away. He was at Eastridge as well. So when I left mid-year, he was a year ahead of me. He was a junior. He just kind of finished out that year, and then he transferred over to Kearney his senior year.
Okay.
And like I said, he went on to play at Iowa and has played in the Rose Bowl. But so we had a great team that junior year, and I think we finished ranked 4th or 5th in the state.
Wow.
And like second in the area. And so, so it worked out. So we got a championship and went on. And then, of course, we'll get into it. I know you'll ask me, but senior year, I ended up getting hurt, and I was getting recruited pretty heavy at that time.
Yeah, it's funny. We kind of on that same wavelength. That's my question. I mean, here you are now. You're in a tougher conference and everything else, and you're junior, and you're making all these moves. What's the recruiting process like at that point? Like, are you getting? I mean, what would you say? How many schools were looking at you? And
So and remember again. So now we're talking, my junior year was 89.
Right.
Okay. So again, no internet. There's no high school games on TV like you see now. Yeah. Again, if your name was in the paper, you had an article, it was a big deal. And there was a couple publications back then out there. Super Preps was one of them. Okay. And so after my junior year, Super Preps had me ranked as the top running back in the Northeast. So, and again, it was a publication. You kind of had to subscribe to it. It wasn't on newsstands or anything like that. But to me, it was a big deal. And So I was getting recruited. I was getting a lot of letters. And so at the end of the day, after my junior year, there was maybe a handful of schools that were really interested.
Right.
The University of Wisconsin, and you say Wisconsin, I'll tell you why in a second. Boston College.
Okay.
Syracuse. And Penn State.
Okay.
So I talked about my good friend Bert Richardson, who went to Iowa. So he got a full scholarship to Iowa. The coach there, the assistant coach that recruited him there, a guy by the name of Bernie Wyatt, who was a longtime coach at Iowa. Well, that particular year, Barry Alvarez, who was the defensive coordinator at Notre Dame at the time, got the head coaching job at Wisconsin. So Bernie Wyatt left Iowa and went to Wisconsin. Well, he was recruiting me for Iowa. He just kept recruiting me for Wisconsin.
Okay.
So and they were really heavy on me. He was recruiting me hard. Boston College was recruiting me hard. And then Syracuse back then, the great Hall of Fame coach, Dick McPherson. Back then, Syracuse was a national power, or at least nationally ranked. Right. And they had the old adage, which, recruiting's kind of changed now, but that old school adage that, hey, we're going to put kind of a fence around our area. And if there's a player good in New York State, we're getting him. We're not losing him.
Right.
And so he really recruited me hard. I mean, a lot of personal phone calls from Coach McPherson, from Dick McPherson. So, so they recruited me hard. Penn State, I took a visit there. Didn't recruit me as hard.
Right.
But Wisconsin did. Was probably the hardest. And being obviously a Catholic kid, going to a Catholic school, I loved Boston College.
Sure.
I loved the city. I loved everything about it. So this is where, it takes a big turn. This is where you get a really big life lesson. So I'll never forget Wisconsin. Bernie Wyatt basically offered me a full scholarship my junior year.
Okay.
Which is kind of unheard of. Now, you see it all the time now where they're going to give a 5-year-old a scholarship. You know what I mean? But, I mean, he literally said, hey, you're our number one choice.
Right.
And then he said a couple words before I started my senior year.
Prophetic words?
Yeah, just don't get hurt.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
So, as Murphy would have it, not Murphy the dog.
Not Murphy the dog.
Murphy's Law.
That Murphy.
Second game of the season, my senior year.
Right.
And ironically, we were playing Aquinas Institute, the other Catholic school. It was a non-contact injury. I was in the secondary, and I just went to cut back on the safety, and my left knee gave out.
Okay.
And I tore my ACL. I had what's called an unhappy triad. So I tore my ACL.
Right.
I tore my MCL, and my medial meniscus cartilage was torn. So back then in 1989, or I guess this was my senior year, so we were in 1990 now. Back then, you do that, it's taboo. You're done. So I'll never forget. So like Syracuse University, and Ivan Fears was recruiting me then. So those either don't know, Ivan Fears has been with the New England Patriots for like 30 years now. He's just a great coach. Been with Bill Parcells for a long time. He was at Syracuse at the time. He recruited me. I'll never forget. He came to my high school.
Right.
And he put his hand on my leg because it was atrophying, right? I wasn't working out or anything. And he just said, man, if it was only a scope, we'd still take you. But we just can't, a full ACL. So I got like tears in my eyes. So Syracuse backed out. Boston College pretty much just stopped calling.
Really? Not even like a thanks but no thanks.
No. Huh? And then Wisconsin.
We don't like Boston College anymore.
When Bernie Wyatt called me back, he gave me an analogy, and I use this analogy to this day, and I tell people. And you want to talk about learning life's not fair, and suck it up, Buttercup moment when you're 18 years old. He basically said, Rene, it's like this. You go to a car dealership to buy a new car, and you go and you pick it out. You look at a bunch of cars, but you find the one you want and you pick it out. And then you tell the dealership, yep, that's mine. I'll be back to get it. You go back to pick that car up, and there's a dent in it. You don't know how the dent got in it, and frankly, you don't care because you're not going to buy that car now, and you're going to tell the dealership, give me the next best car, right? The other one you looked at, well, wasn't the one I wanted originally, but it's pretty good. I'm going to take that one.
Right.
And it's so true. And it's a tough life lesson, to learn as an 18-year-old, but it's true. So I had, I could do one of two things. I could sulk about it and cry and blow everything up, or I could have my surgery, get, rehabbed, get put back together right, and then get that chip on your shoulder and fight to still make it.
So, it kind of, I understand that analogy, but I also don't see like you did come back from that and you did make something yourself, and it's a little foreshadowing for later on, but for them to be so quick to dismiss, I mean, how did that